I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's April 22nd, 2025, Earth Day. The Supreme Court is considering the LGBTQ books opt-out case from Montgomery County, Maryland. Montgomery County Executive Mark Eldridge explains his veto of a tax rebate bill for office-to-apartment conversions. Maryland Transportation Secretary Paul Wiedefeld responds to the National Transportation Safety Board's determination that the collapsed Key Bridge in Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay Bridge were not evaluated for strength. DC officials seek to use a 2009 law to go around congressional limitations on city spending, but the shortfall still stands. The Virginia Office of Drinking Water releases investigation report of last winter's water quality failures in the city of Richmond. A new report from the Maryland Comptroller's Office looks at climate costs in the state. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore composer and woodwind player Seth Keibel. The songs come from his 2018 album Tiny Hands, Big Desk. Flo Anito on vocals, Christian Perez on guitar, Bob Abbott double bass, Tom Teasley on percussion, and Seth Keibel on the clarinet. Sound recording and engineering by Mike Harvey, Wes Lanich, and Steve Steckler.
Little group of states pulled the tiny levers for the big mouth guy and left us all with one huge colossal mistake. Dum, 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 dum. Tiny hands behind a great big desk, thin-skinned, immature, and self-obsessed. Tiny man full of fear and ire. Tiny hands might set the world on fire.
The Supreme Court is considering the LGBTQ books opt-out case from Montgomery County Public Schools. In 2022-23, following the introduction of LGBTQ-themed books in elementary schools, some parents, mostly religiously motivated, asked to be exempted from reading these books, similar to the opt-out option the state of Maryland offers to parents on sex education. The books in question are not a part of the sex education curriculum, and they do not deal with sex, but include examples of LGBTQ relationships. Religious parents, particularly Muslim and Ethiopian, gathered in large numbers to protest outside the offices of the school district. We've covered the controversy in depth, starting with a June 2023 interview with one of the leaders of the protest, Wael El-Koshairi, and in several more reports as the case wound its way through the appeals process. The district and appeals courts both denied the parents seeking protection of their religious liberty. Standing case law says that parents can take their children out of school when they disagree with content, but they cannot prescribe content to schools. But led by the religious liberty law firm, the Beckett Group, parents have sought to appeal to the highest court, where they are hoping for a redirection of the old precedent. In the run-up to the Supreme Court's hearing, which to me seems very likely to go to the parents and reset the law nationally in favor of religious liberty and against public school autonomy, both the Washington Post and the New York Times have written articles that hold MCPS, Montgomery County Public Schools, responsible for allowing things to escalate and handing a conservative Supreme Court the sword with which to smite public school autonomy. This is, in fact, the sophisticated version of the I hate politics zeitgeist. The frustration that others should rise above their political interests to agree with us because our view of the world is superior, rational, and apolitical. Both the newspapers fundamentally misunderstand that public education politics is, in fact, politics. They want it to be pristine, untouched by the same political process that provides the school district its billions of dollars. Truth is, Montgomery County is divided between those who want to see LGBTQ affirming textbooks even in elementary schools and those who want their children not to have to learn about LGBTQ lifestyles in school. There are associated questions about age appropriateness. Faced with divisive issues, MCPS has routinely kicked things up to courts, sidestepping blame and kudos. We see this repeatedly with special education determination, where the school district will let the legal process determine accommodations rather than do so themselves. In adding LGBTQ books to elementary schools, MCPS believed they were serving the people of Montgomery County. While many residents in the county may side with religious parents on the opt-out issue, they also want these books in school. Megan Stack, who wrote the article for the New York Times and is a county resident, explicitly says that she doesn't herself care about the books themselves, but rather the principle of opting out. The opt-out, you may say, is harmless, but it is not. It will require teachers to rework their teaching to make the exception. Certainly, students cannot be tested on optional material. There are educational benefits of affirming LGBTQ students and families inside classrooms. MCPS even has a saying that it meets students where they are, a truly high ambition that is seldom met or can realistically be met. And as a result, expectation failures cause angst among parents. The Board of Education escalated the problem itself with intemperate words and an early delegation of the issue to school principals, which caused religious parents to have an expectation that their position would be honored. And when it wasn't, they went to courts. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elridge is vetoing a bill that the County Council had passed to give tax rebates to developers who convert office buildings to apartments. This audio is excerpted from County Executive Elridge's weekly message to residents and includes background music.
This bill was sold as a way to help with housing, but what it does is automatically hand out 100% property tax exemption for 20 years to developers who are doing these conversions. There's no analysis of a need for subsidies. And in contrast, we have examples of developers already doing these conversions that are financed by banks requiring no subsidies at all. While the council raises the number of moderately priced dwelling units, MPDUs, from 15% to 17.5%, in the real world, that amounts to 3 units out of every 100 units built. And despite all the rhetoric from some council members about the need for more workforce housing, this does not address it at all. There is no requirement for workforce housing. They claim that we'll get more income taxes from the residents in these buildings, but that ignores how housing markets work. While the county is zoned for over 100,000 units, they don't get built all at once. They only get built in response to market demand. These units, first of all, aren't needed to supply housing that otherwise couldn't be built. We already have the zoning to build this housing if there's demand. If there's demand for 4,000 units in 2027, that's likely to be the number of units that are going to be built. And they'd be built from our existing capacity, which exceeds, as I said, over 100,000 units. They could be built from the 30,000 units that are already approved and can start as soon as the developer pulls a building permit.
Every morning when I wake up, I brew me some coffee
A few weeks ago, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, had upbraided Maryland for not evaluating the strength of its bridges, including the collapsed Key Bridge in Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Yesterday, Maryland Transportation Secretary Paul Wiedefeld responded with a letter to NTSB, which said that the current design and condition of the Bay Bridge's pier protection complies with its federal permit. Bridges that comply with their federal permit throughout the United States do not require modification. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy had used standards recommended by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, called AASHTO, to criticize Maryland's bridge management. Secretary Wiedefeld is using federal standards to say all is okay. Maryland Transportation Authority declined to be interviewed, but it seems that the two sides might be using different yardsticks. Wiedefeld also points out that the state of Maryland had initiated a $160 million project in the spring of 2024 to evaluate and study bridge protection at the Bay Bridge, and had hired the consulting firm Moffat and Nickel, a nationally recognized company for their expertise regarding vessel collision design of bridges. Wiedefeld's letter does not mention anything about the collapsed Key Bridge, and the timeline in the letter suggests that Maryland Transportation Authority acted on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge evaluation after the Key Bridge collapse, and that NTSB might be right in asserting that the state had neglected bridge strength evaluation for decades.
Turn on the telly, flip to the news. Little bit anxious, I know it's no use. The world's spinning faster.
Washington, D.C. has been in a pickle after the Trump administration and the Republican Congress assumed power in January 2025. The city's budget and laws are subject to congressional approval, and D.C. does not have representation in the federal legislature. President Trump wanted to reduce crime and beautify the city. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser agreed to repaint the Black Lives Matter mural near the White House and reached a deal with Trump over how the city and its most powerful resident would work together. But the Republican Congress has been on its own path on this. As part of the continuing resolution, which is a stopgap arrangement before Congress actually passes a budget, the feds limited DC's spending to 2024 levels, which in practice has meant $1 billion in spending cuts. Yashim Sain, director of the DC Policy Center, explains.
The city is not facing a traditional budget shortfall. A traditional budget shortfall is you have committed to some spending, but you don't have enough money to pay for it. That is not the situation at all. The situation is we have enough money to meet our approved budget, but the Congress is forcing us to cut that approved budget to last year's level by including us under the continuing resolution that affects the federal government. The local budgets grew by $1.1 billion between fiscal years 24 and 25. But importantly, the real impact is even greater because some of that growth came from increases in debt service, $110 million more this year compared to last. We cannot not pay that. We cannot go to the bond market and say, hey, we're not going to be able to meet our debt service because Congress tells us not to pay. Another item, about $90 million in there, is pension fund obligation increases. We need to meet that. We committed $275 million more to Metro. Another deadly sin if we do not make the required contributions to an interstate compact. In this case, it is WMATA. So the actual problem is slightly bigger than the plain budget numbers. Now, how is the city addressing this? One of the things that the mayor is doing is spending cuts, but the city is using another tool. In 2009, the council passed legislation allowing the city to go 6% above the appropriated budget. And the justification for that was that there could be emergencies that we haven't foreseen while preparing the budget, and we want to be able to meet those emergencies so long as we have the money without breaking the appropriations law. And what is that? That basically tells us that the city cannot spend anything about what it's approved through a budget. Now we're using that law, even though there isn't a traditional emergency. But, I would argue that it is an emergency for the city, because cutting the budget by that ginormous amount has an impact on schools, has an impact on public safety, has an impact on public health and environment. So trash collection is what I mean. And those are the things that, that will be touched by budget cuts, because that's 2/3 of our budget is human services, public safety, and education.
So being able to go 6% above the appropriate amounts is also allowed not just by the city, but by Congress itself.
Correct. That law has been passively approved by the Congress, so it's on the books.
Now they would have to undo that in order for the continuing resolution, if it wants to stop that, would have to include that.
I'm not sure if there's any interest at the Congress to undo that. Being able to reduce this problem by $400 or $500 million in some ways has taken the pressure off the Congress to do something.
What is your expectation whether DC will get back all its money through the process, or do you think that the promise that was made to the mayor, I think implicitly by the president, will not be honored by Congress?
We have not seen any concrete action from the Congress to solve this problem. The impetus behind all of this is the federal government failing to adopt its own fiscal year 25 budget, right? That's why they're under a continuing resolution, and we got caught in that net. From what I understand, the markups are going to happen next week, and the Congress totally plans to submit a fiscal year 25 federal budget to the president by Memorial Day. If that is resolved, the feds get out of the CR, continuing resolution, automatically we will get out of the continuing resolution. So this may not affect us for the rest of the fiscal year, but given where we are today, the city cannot bank on this being resolved by end of May or middle of June. The city has to take actions to make these cuts, but then we're going to have to deal with all the uncertainty about 26. We don't know what's going to happen to Medicaid, but all the indications are it's going to be cut. We don't know if there are going to be any other riders.
Yashim Sain, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Have a good day.
It's out of control. Each day new disasters. It's taking a toll. Sailors are grasping on tied to the ship.
During a winter storm in January 2025, the city of Richmond in Virginia lost water supply for nearly a week between January 6th and January 11th and had to use boil advisories. A report from the state's Office of Drinking Water identified problems in how the water agency was run. Specifically, the city was running its water treatment plant in winter mode as a cost-saving measure. When power went out during the storm, the plant did not have battery power to continue running. Without power to close effluent valves, the pumps and equipment flooded. It seems that Richmond's water treatment plant was poorly managed, with a culture of acquiescing to low standards. The staff accepted an inappropriate level of concern such that problems were not assigned to fix or repair, or to communicate these issues. Neither consultants nor regulators raised red flags concerning the water treatment plant's design limitations over many years, which gave the staff the false impression that problematic issues were not urgent to address, the report said.
People are people. I don't understand.
In Maryland, the Comptroller's Office released a new report on the cost of climate to mark Earth Day. Here is Comptroller Brooke Learman.
We have launched a new series of reports on state spending. This, to me, is a part of my job of really digging in and making sure that government is working better. And that means making sure that we are getting more for our money. And so our first report was on transit and why transit is costing so much. And we took a particular look at the purple line. And this report is about climate. Because we know that climate change costs money. We're facing more frequent and intense extreme weather events, rising sea levels, droughts, wildfires, prolonged heat waves. And these events have significant costs for individuals, for communities and neighborhoods.
Were you able to calculate the costs?
One of the things that we're looking at is how do we calculate those costs? We can look back and say, hey, the U.S. sustained 403 weather and climate disasters since 1980. That exceeded over $2.9 trillion in costs. And just in Maryland from 1980 to 2024, total recovery costs for the 85 extreme weather events we had were between 10 and 20 billion, according to NOAA. But then there's going to be a next step, which is how do we calculate building a more resilient state to be able to respond to those events. There are costs to doing nothing, right? There are costs to creating, to building out a more resilient infrastructure, but there are also significant costs to doing nothing, including consequences that could stifle our economic growth, particularly impacting folks in low-income households and communities of color. And then finally, making Maryland more climate resilient will help attract investment, promote long-term economic growth, environmental stability, and grow the economy.
One of the big vulnerabilities Maryland has is along its coastline with respect to climate change. What are the costs involved? You know, every time there's a big event that sort of destroys homes and infrastructure along the coast, we go back and build it. So
Sure.
Is that kind of a balance that you look at within the report?
So we don't look at that in this specific report, but it will be in, I think, a future report that will be done because of the Renew Act sponsored by Senator Katie Fry Hester and Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo. That's an interesting example for specific reason that insurance will not be available at some point to those homeowners. Right. You know, we are seeing policies pull out of California, Florida. We will see constrained insurance marketplace in Maryland. I mean, we already are.
Brooke Learman, thank you. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thanks.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home.
To us mortals with all of our flaws, children and hearts in cages.
Music for this episode comes from Baltimore composer and woodwind player Seth Keibel. The songs come from his 2018 album called Tiny Hands, Big Desk. Flo Anito on vocals, Christian Perez on guitar, Bob Abbott, double bass, Tom Teasley, percussion, and Seth Keibel on the clarinet. Sound recording and engineering by Mike Harvey, Wes Lanich, and Steve Steckler. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
This is not our United States. This is not my